Hey crew, how's it going? Patrick Goodman here. And we are here doing something a little different. We're going to get back to the Captain's Log actual play here in the not terribly distant future, but today I am going to do a quick review of the Lower Decks campaign guide. Before we get started, a little housekeeping, the usual stuff. If you like the video, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel. If you feel like contributing to me and to the channel, there are going to be links down below for that. In the meantime, I want to give full disclosure. I am a freelance writer, and I do frequently write for Star Trek adventures, but I didn't have anything to do with the Lower Decks campaign guide. They didn't give me a copy. I bought this myself. Well, technically, my wife bought it for me for Father's Day, but you know, it was bought. Somebody bought it, and it wound up in my hot little hands. That being said, let's get things going here. I do believe we've got things going right now. Well, I do have the physical book. I don't want it to disappear, because if you watch my little recording, you'll notice it. Magic. Weird special effects, right? The virtual background does weird things. I think everybody's figured this one out about those by now. Anyway, this is a monster of a book. And for something based on what a lot of people would consider extremely light source material, they're not watching the source material because there's a whole lot more going on that show than most people are willing to give it credit for, it seems. But it's 240 pages. It is worth every penny you pay for it. It is crammed full of stuff. You know, it's a review. Spoiler alert, I love the book. Let's see if we can get... there we go. The Daystrom Institute. So empty, you know, for now. We'll see how that works out. The production values on this thing are golden. I can't praise their art direction enough. Ariel Orea, beautiful, beautiful work to everybody involved, the artists, the writers. For those who aren't familiar with it, here's the contents. You got most of the sections that you're normally going to get in one of Modiphius's books. When I say the production quality is gorgeous. I love the way the chapter headers are set up. I love the fact that Mike McMahon took time out from his schedule to write a little bit for the book. Gave us a nice forward there. The introduction does what introductions do. It introduces. And get used to this guy. Badgie shows up a lot. A whole lot. Now, one of the biggest concerns that people seem to have, and one of the biggest misconceptions people seem to have, is they think that just because it says Lower Decks Campaign Guide on the cover, that it is all about the animated show, Star Trek Lower Decks. And while it's got that in there, obviously, fact is, this book is almost universally useful. You could be playing Enterprise era, you could be playing Discovery in the 32nd century, and everything in between, and there's always going to be lower ranking crewmen. There's always going to be lower decks, which they address nicely right here. Little yesterday's Enterprise section. because it doesn't have to be about the crew of the Cerritos. It can be any lower level, lower ranking crew members. And that is really important to get across. Chapter 1 is a great wrap up of how things look right after the end of Nemesis up to, or not quite to the events on Mars that happen in 2385. We're almost there. We're almost to the Romulan supernova. But this is a extremely well put together. You got a general overview. You got, what the Federation is up to. You've got what the Klingons are up to after the end of the Dominion War. The Romulans. And the surprise baddies of the show, the Packlids. And anybody who told me 3 years ago that they were going to find a way to make the Packlids a viable threat in a Star Trek show, I'd have looked at you and said, you're smoking something. And yet here we are. And then a quick introduction of some of the other organizations and polities that we deal with in Lower Decks. The Collectors Guild, which could just as easily be anywhere in history. I imagine these guys have been around for a long time. The Drukmani are pretty new, but anybody can wind up dealing with them. Many of the second contacts that we saw in the first couple of seasons, and some of the more notable planets. This chapter does a lot of heavy lifting, chapter 2, because it deals with things that you see in the show that have to be going on, but they've never really been addressed. How do you do second contacts? Support operations. And that's what the bulk of Starfleet is doing. They're supporting, the big flashy hero ships. They can't all be Galaxy class starships. They can't all be the Enterprise. But it explains how to do this. The various general orders that are involved, General Order 3. But how things get done. Let me flip back here. This is one of those things that they start introducing some random tables in other books, but they really lean into it in this book, and it's fantastic. Some of these tables are just funny as can be. Some of them are just extremely useful. What does one planet have to offer the Federation? For instance, voila, you have a table for that. If you can't figure it out on your own, if you don't have an idea, let the dice do a little bit of the thinking for you and spur your imagination on. What do ensigns do? Well, they get some of the grunt work. Once upon a time, that was handled by by privates, but now a lot of it is handled by ensigns. Everybody's got to have something to do on a starship. Some of it just is kind of well, it's less glamorous than other things. Sometimes people die. But this chapter handles so much. This is actually does a huge amount of the heavy lifting, excuse me, for the chapter by showing you what a lot of what goes on behind the curtain in Starfleet, which is all a little more a little more human resources than we might have thought, thinking we were getting a book about an animated comedy. one of my favorite things in the world, Division 14. Medical weirdness. And then the next chapter, chapter 3, gets you into the experience of what it's like to be a lower decker. You just got out of the academy. Congratulations. Here's your first ship. Follow the yellow line. And it's not always glamorous. But as Mariner points out more than once, it's where a lot of the action is. While the senior officers on the bridge are getting all the glory, you're doing the actual work as a lower decker. One of the fun themes that was explored once or twice on the show, promotion is punishment. You don't always think of it like that. Some info on things like programming the holodeck, settling disputes, dealing with less than glamorous duties. This is a fun one right here. Supervising characters. It takes the basic supporting character mechanic that's already built into Star Trek Adventures and kind of turns it on its head. It creates higher ranking characters. And it's a great adaptation of an existing mechanic. It's one of those things you like to see happen when your game line is maturing, and you want to be able to see the various things that can be done. Now we start getting into the fun stuff. Science and technology, which lots of people enjoy. You got planets and spatial phenomena and what they do to the ships and what they do to ensigns and all that happy jazz. You get rules for creating your own critters. Not unlike building ships or supporting characters or NPCs. But it's a nice little addition. This is the chapter that has brought much joy to my daughter's life and my son as well. The player options, because that means new life paths, new species to play. Some of them are specifically from the show, Aprigosians, for instance. Here is what made my daughter immensely happy. You can now play a dolphin or a whale. My son thought the idea of the clickets was funny as well. But it is such a wide variety. You got the number wizards, the Aprigosians, cetaceans and clickets, exocomps. Yeah, if you want to play, if you want to play Peanut Hamper or reasonable facsimile thereof, there you go. The Gorn, just don't interrupt their weddings. The Kalon show up. They were originally in a Next Generation episode. The Packlids, of course, you can now play a Packlid if you are so inclined. And the Temerians. I love the fact that there's no such thing as a traditional Temerian name, because everybody wants to wind up in the language, and since their language is metaphor-based, they all want to be unique. Now, tools and weapons. If you were like me, a kid in the 70s, you recognize the Spock helmet. It's canon now. I don't know whether I should be overjoyed or terrified. Maybe a little of both. But you got a lot of fun little tech here. You got Packwood guns. You got giant Vulcan femur bones. We won't ask where you got that. Yeah, we will. Where'd you get that? But they've done a lot of, you know, understandably weird stuff in Lower Decks, the series. The game mastering chapter has a ton of advice on how to get how to get over the top when you need to. If you're playing more towards the tone of the show, learn your tropes. Learn the things that make Star Trek, Star Trek. Learn the things that make Lower Decks, Lower Decks. Don't be afraid to make oddly specific references all the time. We're gamers. That's what we do. So you can't tell me the idea hasn't occurred to you. Make a transporter clone if you want to. But the big thing, this is one of the best pieces of advice, engaging your players, because they have to buy in. If you're going to do this kind of an episode of this kind of a series, this tone, your players have to buy in. So sit down with them on that session 0 and talk it out. Don't be afraid to play with your tropes. It also comes with like a dozen mission briefs. And then we get into arguably my personal favorite part of the book, the Starships, because I like me some ship pulling. Again, I want to compliment the graphic design on the book, because these 2-page spreads for the ships are just gorgeous. This is probably my favorite ship in the book, if only because for something that looks like a sword carved out of obsidian and ready to be plunged into your heart on top of a sacrificial altar, instead of the medical ship that it actually is. I love that they do that in the show. They play with expectations a lot. They will mess with you a lot. The Vulcan ship, which can probably serve as just about any Vulcan ship you need in any era. One of the very first Federation, but not Starfleet space frames we got. Here's another one, the Ganashia, the joint Tellarite and Andorian venture. Haven't really seen much of these in action, but you've seen them in the background in a few of the space dock scenes. Then you got a whole selection of famous ships. The Quito, one of Mariner's prior stations. The Macduff, space stations, warp shuttles. A whole section on Packwood starships, including rules on how to make your own clump ships. Not unlike the Frankenstein fleet rules from Utopia Planitia. Then you've got a bunch of fun alien ships. Some of them are from the show itself, the Hesperians and the Monavine. Some Klingon ships, Drukmani ships, ground vehicles, which I don't think they've ever done anything with ground vehicles before. So this is kind of a first. But there are some notable car chases in Lower Decks, so you gotta have cars. Then into allies and adversaries, which is where you got a lot of your NPCs. And once you get past the NPCs, here's one thing that I do enjoy that they've done. Not only do you have the 8 species in the player options, but they've got 3 like mini species write-ups. And if you want to do something with the Kzinti, you're not alone. And now you can, because we've got attribute modifiers for them. NPCs from the Klingons, the Packlids, another one of those mini species write-ups. Vindor. And of course the Hysperians, which is also kind of a mini. They're basically humans from the Ren Fair. So if you want to get your D&D on in Star Trek Adventures, the Hysperians might be the way to go. I mean, you'll have to figure out how they got into Starfleet, but that's half the fun of what we do, is figuring out why somebody's in Starfleet. And then you've got Beasts and Critters, Agamus, of course, who looks to be playing a major role next season. Armus, a swarm of eels. Gamatos, Matogas, you know what I mean. Spider cows. If you need an M113 salt vampire, we got one of those too. And of course, spider cows and the dog. I'm not going to get too deep into chapter 9 because I haven't read through all of it yet, but it's what I've read so far has been fun. But we got a dozen mission briefs and we got 3 adventure mini campaigns. I mean, there's, you know, 3, and depending on how many times you get together a month, there's 3 to 6 months of story ideas already. The mini campaign is called Unsung Heroes, and you've got 3 adventures written by 3 fine writers, Fred Love, Al Spader, and I believe Allison Seib wrote one of those. I could be wrong. If I am wrong, let me know in the comments, and I'll fix that some other time. Reasonably comprehensive index, and of course the occupied area of Daystrom and their sentient AIs. And that's the Lower Decks campaign guide. I am a little disappointed, for instance, that we don't have duplers in the playable species, because I know you can play one in Captain's Log. So why aren't they here, guys? But overall, this book is a solid 9 out of 10. I loved the show pretty much from the get-go. I was not convinced I was going to like it until I started watching it, but I'm glad I did, because it's one of the most solid, loving pieces of Trek that is in production right now. Every episode is a love letter to the entire franchise. It's great stuff. The book is great. You don't have to like the show to get use out of the book. You can use 80 some odd % of it in any campaign, regardless of whether you like Lower Decks, the show, or not. So that is not a requirement. You will get some utility out of this book. I virtually guarantee it. Like I said, a good 80%, easily usable anywhere. especially if you want to get that, you know, lower decks experience and offer that to your players. So I think that's it for tonight, guys. I'm going to try to get this edited and get it up. I appreciate you showing up tonight. Give me a like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and live long and prosper. Talk to you guys later.